Hey there, artist. It's Mr. Jankart. So for our first project, we're going to do a line project. We're going to be using pen in order to create value, to show depth, to show form. But before we do that, I always like to start a unit with looking at artists who are masters of what we're going to be trying to do. And so we're going to just take a few minutes and look at a few different artists and how they use line, and you'll see that each of them uses it a little differently. They have their own unique style. So I hope you'll engage and find this helpful, because you'll be doing much the same thing. So here we go. Now this is one of the most famous artists ever. It's Leonardo da Vinci. This is actually not a drawing. It is a print made from woodcut. But still, regardless, you can see how he's using line. Now, let's think about the properties of line. You guys should have already watched the video that tells you about the properties and the 5 basic types of line. But let's talk about the properties of line a little bit. So their length and width and surface and direction. So the surface, look at the surface of her hair, the texture. It looks like hair, right? Braided hair here. This is just kind of tucked in. But all of this is formed just simply with line, with different thicknesses of line, different lengths of line, and so on and so forth. Look at her hair over here, these curvy, beautiful lines that help show her hair falling off. It shows that her hair is curly. Look in the background here how he used these straight, these are called hatching lines, whenever you put lines parallel to one another and you just run them like this to create value. So these are up against these wavy curly lines. These straight lines create contrast, and so you can see the difference between the wavy lines and the straight lines, and that adds depth because you can tell that her hair is in front of these straight lines in the background, and then it gives it the idea that there's actually some depth in the picture. Look at her eyelashes. They're very thick. Use heavy lines for those, thick lines rather. So Da Vinci, a master of using line. Here we have a more modern artist. This is Frank Frazetta. If you ever want to look up any of his artwork, he did a lot of illustrations for Edgar Rice Burroughs, who wrote Tarzan. He also wrote the Barsoom series, which is John Carter, The Princess of Mars. They made a terrible movie a few years ago called John Carter, which was nowhere near as good as what the books are. So read the books, they're better. But he did this kind of fantasy art. This is Tarzan actually on top of this lion getting ready to stab it. But you can see how he uses line here. There's very thick lines right here, obviously shaded places. How the grass has these very thick, heavy lines all over the place. In the front here, you see that the lines are very far apart, so it gives the impression that there's light falling in the front here. There's light falling on the top of the lion's legs. Light on this side of Tarzan's face, up along his arm. The light's all up there, but underneath where it's dark, it's darker, and in between there's, somewhere in the middle. The lines aren't super close together, but they're not super far apart. So here's another one by Frank Frazetta. It takes a minute to discern this picture because there's so much going on, but there's 3 pterodactyls, which are like dinosaur type animals. This is also from one of Edgar Rice Burroughs' books. It's an illustration. Here's a saber-toothed tiger, and they're attacking the saber-toothed tiger. But again, look at all this beautiful line work. It implies a certain type of texture on the wings. It also serves the purpose of showing value. Remember, when I say value, it means shading. Okay, it's just light and darkness. That's what value has to do with in art. Again, right here you see on the pterodactyl's underside, it's dark. But just all those lines make for such a visually interesting piece of artwork. This is Norman Rockwell, very famous artist from the 50s. He did all of these kind of picturesque, perfect pictures of like family moments, of little kids in ice cream shops having ice cream, just all these very, wholesome, good scenes. Did lots and lots of them. So here you see Dad, and he's buckling a life vest onto his son who's getting ready to go fishing. But look how he implies Dad's got a little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow going on here with the shading on his face. You see the shading on the boy's hair. But imagine this picture without any of the shading, without any of these extra lines, and it was just an outline. Now, it'd still be a really good drawing, and that outline would show that there's mass there, there's somebody there, there's something. But the shading adds such a whole different depth to it. It's really well done. This is actually, I don't know the artist. This is just something I pulled offline. But the reason that I pulled it offline is because of how well it shows the use of these long contour lines that flow around the guy's face, around his eyes, around his nose, his hair. You can see these great curvy, wavy lines. There's some thin lines, there's some thick lines. In his jacket, even in his jacket, if you look closely, you can see that there's lines underneath the dark colored black. Right in here especially, it's not quite black, it's more gray, and you can see the line work underneath of it. So very cool example, very much more modern art. Again, just another example off the internet that I grabbed it's more of a quick sketch, but you can see really well this is called cross hatching. It's just like hatching that runs parallel, but cross hatching kind of, it crosses, it's like X's. So another good one there. I believe this is digital art. One of the things I like about this particular piece is the difference in the line work here. That's long, flowing, slightly curved lines on the backside of the bison. But up here, they're much different. They show a much different texture around, what's called a mane. The same on the head. It shows the hair in a very interesting way. A long kind of goatee thing going on here. Long hair, long and thick. So again, well done. Just some simple lines down here on the bottom to show the grass. Here's a deer. Now this is a lot more sketchy. It's a lot more, got a lot more texture to it to show the fur. But again, you get the values going on here. Underneath is darker. As you get to the top, it's lighter. This is a white-tailed deer because there's no shading on his tail, or hardly any shading. It's mostly white. And I believe this is the last one we have. Just an elephant. The rugged lines. If you've ever seen an elephant, they are very wrinkly, so the artist does a good job of showing those wrinkles. Not just with simple lines. These aren't just, one-stroke lines. These are lines that were made to have some roughness to them. Look at them closely at each of these lines, how they're not quite perfect, right? Pretty sure this was done digitally, but again, the artist uses a very specific type of line to show a very specific texture, specific types of shading, and you can see that through all of these, that artists are using different types of line to make a visual statement. So those are just some masters of line that we've looked at there. Keep those in mind. Come back once we get to the point where you guys start using pens to do your shading. Come back and look at these. They're super helpful and pleasant to look at. So that's all I got for you right now, guys. We'll be back with more stuff about line and the project we're going to pursue. So stay tuned.